Hi, I'm Seamus Johnston. This is about systems administration. Thank you all so much for coming out on cold January day. Thanks to Code and Supply and Justin Elliott for hosting. This is what I'm going to be covering tonight. I'm taking a moment to read it myself. And I want to start with this disclaimer, is that, so I've been using computers since I was 3, and I'm 27 now, for reference. And I've been using Linux as an operating system since I was 7. Slackware was my first distro. But I've only actually been doing professional system administration for a year and a half. So I welcome any of you that have experience. If you have something you want to share that you think is valuable, please just speak up. While I'm talking, it's fine. I would welcome that. And first of all, with a definition, I assume you all have a basic idea of what system administration is, or you wouldn't be here. I think it's that which makes users and machines interface conveniently, securely, and painlessly. And that's a really vague definition that could just as easily be speaking of web developers. And I think that's important because what you do will be very, very different from company to company. What tools you use are very, very different from company to company. But it all comes down to every single company, anywhere. What you're going to be doing as a system administrator is that there are machines running, there are people using them. The people using them do not know how to keep them running. You are the go-between in the middle. What a server is. This, I think, everyone in the room probably already has an idea of, too, but it can be vague, because sometimes when people say the word server, they mean a piece of hardware that costs several $1,000s and was manufactured specifically for the purpose of having, of being able to handle a high load, and is kept in a data center where the temperature and humidity, so forth, is very carefully controlled so that it doesn't just explode. Not literally, but die. And sometimes when people say a server, they mean a software package that does a server thing, like a web server, or an email server, or a database server, or a file server, et cetera, et cetera. Or sometimes they mean like a combination of those ideas. Like, I could install a web server package on my laptop, and my laptop would be a web server, even though it was not manufactured for that purpose and wouldn't do it very well. And also sort of means an abstract idea. And then some useful ideas about networks. A network administrator is not the same thing as a systems administrator, but at a lot of companies, that's kind of a very abstract theoretical thing, because as a system administrator, if you have multiple servers to manage and they are interacting with each other, you're responsible for how they interact, which is the network. Servers having conversations with each other, sending data to each other over physical connections, including through the air physical connections. The servers being able to format the data correctly when it is sending it, so that the server on the other end receiving it understands it according to standardized protocols, using several layers of abstraction so that software at the top, like your mail server software, does not have to know what kind of network card is in the computer that it is running on in order to be able to use the network to, in this case, send email. And some search terms, because this talk isn't about that. But I did want to give you a hint. If what I'm saying right now sounds completely unfamiliar, here's some ideas to get you started with reading. In systems administration, one particular aspect of it that's not really as important to developers often is ports. When a network interface is assigned an IP address, and if I'm using a term that you don't know, please just, I guarantee someone else in the room does not know either. Okay, so if you have a network interface and it's assigned an IP address, you may want to have multiple services listening on that IP address for connections. And ports are, I think of them as like thousands of tiny holes in the back of the server, but I've heard them analogized as different floors in an office building or as different rooms to access a house. And some examples there being 22 is a standard for SSH. 80 is a standard for insecure web connections. And moving on from the idea of analogies for ports is, I think the biggest barrier to becoming good at systems administration is not having to learn a particular technology, because that's just a lot of reading. It's pretty straightforward. It is a lot of reading, but it's straightforward reading. I think the biggest barrier is that you can't see what you're doing. And if that makes no sense, it will in a minute. If there's web developers in the room, they probably have an idea of what HTTP transactions are, but you've never seen one. You've never seen an address in memory either. You can't see a packet. When you're doing remote systems administration, you can't even see the computer that you're interacting with. It's elsewhere. It's an abstract idea. So I'm going to tell a story. And this is your little patch of internet. You have a web server here, maybe running the Apache software. You have maybe a database to keep some information in. Your web server serves up your snakes or your gems or whatever have you. I don't know. These might even be on the same computer. Hopefully not. Hopefully you have separate servers for them. You decide that it would be a great idea to not lose any of your data or your developer's hard work, so you back it up. How much you back up, where you back it up, how long you keep the backups is all variable, is subject to law, to cost, to common sense, and talking to your developers. But you need a server or a service to do that. For example, Amanda is very useful. All of the things that I have labeled on this diagram they're not necessarily the best, but they're free or open source. They're very widely used, and so they make a good entry point if you want to go home and download something and start playing with it on your own laptop or other things that I'll get to later in the talk. At some point, you would probably want to have a firewall, which could be a its own dedicated server. It could be on a different server, but it keeps the bad traffic out, lets the good traffic in, theoretically. The traffic goes to the firewall instead of going directly to the service that might be vulnerable to attack. The firewall passes it on. With a firewall, with a virtual private network, you can have your servers talking to each other inside of the compound securely and encryptedly, even if the servers are in geographically disparate data centers. So that's the virtual part of it, them being able to treat servers that are not necessarily in the same room together, as if they are in a secure location together. Firewall, virtual private network, not the same concept, but very useful in tandem. And making sure to configure them correctly. I'm going to pause that story for a quick anecdote. When I was learning IP tables, which is a Linux utility for managing firewalls, I started out with just two simple rules. One, don't allow any incoming traffic. And two, allow incoming traffic on port 22, which is SSH, which is how I would get into the server to administer it. Said, good job me. Logged out, tried to log back in again. Anyone want to take a guess what message I got?
You would block all the traffic and at a higher rank. So
Yes.
you would block.
The computer everyone in the room probably has had some experience with this at some point, is that computers do what you tell them to do, not what you mean for them to do. That will kill you in system administration over and over again.
In the order you tell them to do it in.
In the order you tell them to do it in. Anyway, done with that anecdote. Monitoring. Again, a familiar concept to web developers. Here is a server that watches the other servers and tells you when they're down or not running correctly. I mean, users are also a monitoring system. But don't use them. That erodes trust. You're there to build trust, not break it down. Somewhere on your to-do list at some point is a concept called high availability. Very simply, this is having multiple servers, possibly in different locations, that all essentially do the same thing, or variations of the same thing. The purpose being, of course, that if one is overloaded or broken, user experience does not degrade. Do not confuse high availability with backups. Backups here, high availability. We gave our database server some friends, and we put them together in a Galera cluster. Yeah, backups. High availability. If your data gets corrupted, having 5 copies of corrupt data is not any better than 1. This. A really useful thing in systems architecture is virtual machines. This is where you take a clean server with no operating system on it, and you install a hypervisor like Xen or KVM. The hypervisor runs virtual servers on it. You can have dozens or even hundreds of computers all running their own operating system that are running on the same physical computer. It's, in many cases, a good way to reduce cost and is helpful in being able to try out new ideas relatively cheaply. And other nice things like providing each of your developers with their own work environment, etc. At this point, you have a fairly large number of servers, and you probably want to consider a configuration management system to keep all of your configuration files and other important bits in one central location. Each of your databases has a configuration file. MySQL, for instance, is my.conf, I believe, yeah. And your Apache server, has its sites available, sites enabled configurations, and you have a lot of really important things that are getting scattered a very large place all over the place. So what a configuration management system does, you take all of these important things, you stick them on one central server together, hopefully with version control, and something like Chef, Ansible, Puppet, CF Engine is Salt?
Yeah.
Salt. Does the work of keeping track of these, and not just keeping track of them, it will also do some of your job for you, as in installing the correct configuration on servers for you, if you tell it to do that, if you know how to do that, which involves reading the documentation for those projects. Continuing on the subject of high availability, a load balancer, a great idea. Having multiple web servers here on virtual machines, and I changed them from Apache because just for the fun of it, and HA proxy, which the load balancer does pretty much, I think, what you would guess it does. It intelligently routes traffic to try to optimize performance and minimize downtime. And a mail server running maybe XM or Postfix or, I don't know, SendMail, if you need one. A lot of companies, I think, outsource their mail, but how about a caching server that will keep copies of commonly accessed resources handy in memory so that they don't have to, so that a query doesn't have to run the whole way to the database every time someone asks for the same, I don't know, PNG image. And this story could go on a lot longer, or it could be a completely different story. This is a story that tells you about setting up an internet site, which is a very different story than setting up the servers for an office, or setting up the servers for a university, or setting up the servers for a research facility. And my mental model does not look anything like this. Probably because I was using Linux from such a young age, my mental model is basically very dark, empty rooms connected with magic portals. What it looks like doesn't matter. It doesn't even have to be visual. It can be It can be audio. The important thing is that you have one and that you deliberately try to develop this in your head. Because when you sit down to work as a system administrator, this is what you're looking at. Or some web interface sometimes that abstracts over this. Now, for this slide and the next one, I'm not going to go through what all of these are and how to use them because I think that would be a waste of your time. Many of you probably already know many of these, and if you don't, they're easy to look up. The point of this slide and the next one is simply that if you come from a Windows background or for whatever other reason you feel intimidated by the idea of running and managing a computer without a mouse or without a graphical interface, and you look at advanced system administrators, you're looking over their shoulder while they're working, and they're just... It's like a hunt and pecker watching a touch typist. The keyboard does not care how the keys are touched. And there is, and I will admit it, a pretty much inexhaustible list of things that you could know, things that you should know, important or useful things to know. But the things you need to know to manage a remote server are very small. You kind of need to know how to get around. You kind of need to know how to deal with files, how to read them, move them, make them. You need a text editor. No holy wars, just pick one that you like, learn how to use it. You need to know how to look for things. You need to know how to find out what's running on a computer when you don't have a graphical task manager or whatever that thing is. See who has accounts on the system and how to manage accounts on the system. Be able to find out things about the system, its hardware, etc. How much disk space it has. Be able to add and remove devices from the system. You need to know how to do some basic networking things like downloading files, checking if the network is running the way you expect it to, see whether a server is answering on a port that you expect to be open. I will specifically call out SSH because there's not much system administration that you can do without that command. But I suspect that most of you have already used it at some point. And if I'm wrong, you are welcome to raise your hands. Okay. It's just a very simple command that when you type it into the command line, it will connect your computer to another computer so you can work on the other computer like you were sitting in front of it, basically. You need to know where some files are. For instance, if something's going wrong with a server, a good place to start checking is its log files, knowing where those are, knowing where configuration files are generally kept. Sudo is another one that I'm going to call out specifically. That's another command that you probably won't be able to get very far without. It simply gives you super user privileges for running commands that your user is not allowed to use. And the last things at the bottom here which I was going to demonstrate, but we had to, we needed to switch laptops. If you want to do something like list the contents of a directory, but you have no idea how to do it, and you're sitting in front of your command line, you can type apropos directory, and it will tell you every command that's currently installed on your system. It'll be a very long list that contains the word directory in its summary. You find a command that you want to run, but you don't know exactly what it does. Read the manual pages for it. That's man space the name of the command. This will tell you what it does. This will tell you how to use it. This will tell you all the options you can use with it. And finally, if you already know what command you're trying to use, like I just mentioned SSH, so we'll go with SSH, but you don't know exactly how to use it, you need a quick reference, almost always just typing the command and passing it -- help will show you a very short summary of how you use it. Where did he go? There you go. I was actually going to ask, this is a Mac. You could you bring up a console so that I could just demonstrate those commands real quick?
Be careful with the last command. You don't want to end up seeing system is going down for maintenance because -- It's a good last resort.
No. 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 Apparently I was doing stuff on this computer 3 months ago. Hey.
Thanks, Amundle. That's not what I wanted. There we go. A couple of nice things for us to look at. I'm going to go with man ls and etc. You get the idea. To get rid of that, I pressed the Q. And is it command tab to go back? There we go. All right. Moving on from that, trying to feel at ease on the command line. Read what's on the screen. This should feel self-evident, but just because you don't understand what it says to you doesn't mean that it's not important. Read what you typed. The power of the command line is very much in that it doesn't do a lot of hand-holding, and it doesn't tend to ask you, did you mean that? Before you hit enter. So, did you check the file permissions? Especially if you're coming from a Windows background, why does it not see the file? The file is right there. Why can't it read the file? I can read the file. Learn how file permissions work in Unix-based systems and do check them. Break things down to simpler concepts. If you're having a hard time, if you want to set up a server and you're having a hard time saying, where do I start? How do I make this talk to this? just try to break it down as simply as you can. Everything has to be happening one thing at a time. Even if they're happening simultaneously, even if there's millions of them happening, they all have to be happening one thing at a time. The packet starts here, it ends up there. You can use UML diagrams for that too, if you're familiar with them. Don't forget maintenance costs. I want to try this great new thing. It's going to revolutionize how developers know this too. But everything has a cost to maintain once you set it up. And conceptualize your ethics, which is at the bottom of the list, which it really should be at the top. Your as a system administrator, you have a lot of access to things, and often not a lot of people looking over your shoulder. And you have to be very committed to knowing what you think is right and doing it at all times. Resources.
It might be worth looking at the Usenix system administrator's code of ethics. It was written by the Sage sysadmin guild group about a decade ago.
Sure. Could you repeat that a little bit louder for everyone else in the room?
There is the system administrator's code of ethics published by Usenix. I will drop a link to it on the Slack shortly.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Question, what is UML diagrams?
What is UML diagrams?
What does it stand for? I don't know.
Unified Modeling Language.
Thank you. It's not specifically a systems administrator tool. It's I think it originated in databases, but I could be wrong. So finally, resources, because so far in this talk, I have not actually told you how to do anything, and that might be depressing. And sadly enough, we're going to get to the end of the talk, and I still will not have told you how to do anything. But I will tell you how to learn, or how I have learned, which may help you. This blog is very old, has dozens and dozens of really useful articles that go through different tools and I'll just, for example, 20 Linux system monitoring tools every sysadmin should know. So if you're thinking, how do I do monitoring as a sysadmin? I would go there and I would click on that article and read it. All of them are really well written with lots of examples. Sysadmin casts. Not a lot of content. Some of it's a little outdated, but they're all really, really high quality. And if you learn better from watching videos, you'll love this. Server fault, the sysadmin's Stack Overflow. I'm not. It has a lot of good information. I don't want to get political. So DigitalOcean is a company. Part of what they sell is servers. They don't sell physical hardware servers. They sell as a service virtual machine servers. And one of the great things about people who are selling you a service is that they want you to know how to use their service. And I have found that this is great for getting documentation on how to do things. Linode is another similar such company. They also have really great system administration how to do basic sysadmin tasks, very well written tutorials. For virtual private networks that I mentioned earlier, the company IVPN's privacy guides, they're written from the consumer point of view, but if but they contain really good conceptualization of what a virtual private network is. So, Arch Linux is a distribution of Linux like Ubuntu or Slackware or Gentoo or whatever, that happens to have a really, really, really super well-written wiki, in my opinion. So I often go there, even when I'm working on a different distribution of Linux, to learn about stuff. I will admit that I have no idea who Greg is, but this guy has been around in the Unix communities probably about as long as I've been alive, and this is a great resource that he's put together for how to use the command line, bash specifically, which comes, which is the default on pretty much every Linux distribution, I think. Definitely Debian, Ubuntu, Red Hat. And learning, so if you want to get beyond the stage where you're just looking up on the internet a command and then copying it letter for letter into your command line, which is not a good thing to do to begin with. Not because there's so many malicious people out there, but because if you're copying something that you do not understand, there's a good chance that it was a solution for a problem that is not exactly the same as your problem. I'm not a big fan of dead tree learning because, I mean, they're just very expensive and they get outdated very quickly. But this was published in 2010. I think it is still, or was revised in 2010. I think it is still incredibly relevant, and I found it to be a very worthwhile read. And from resources, I'm going to move on to Playgrounds, which is that maybe you want to try some of this out on your own and not spend a whole lot of money doing it. I feel like the easiest intro is you can simply get your own little virtual machine on the internet. DigitalOcean, Linode, we already talked about them. Okay. Amazon Web Services, which is really, 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 really popular right now. And I mean, you're laughing at me, but I use the NoScript browser plugin, and it is rare that I actually get to a website that is not using Amazon to at least host their images, if nothing else. And I think they let you play with their products for free to a certain extent. So, yeah, both worth learning and free playground. I happen to like Scaleway a lot, but I don't know what recommends it besides my liking it. In the same category of they will give you access to your own little server that you can play with however you like for a small fee. But that's all out in the cloud being somebody else's data center, obviously. It's not floating in space. These things all exist in a physical location, which I'm not saying that to insult anyone's intelligence. I'm saying that as part of system administration, being able to conceptualize things. It's sometimes nice to have a server in your own home because you want to use it in your own home, or because it's just nice to be able to physically touch the thing. And if you have an old laptop that's sitting around with, I don't know, about 4 gigs of RAM or thereabouts, CubesOS is I would like to call it a Unix derivative system. The developer took the idea of virtual machines, the hypervisor that I showed you earlier. In Cube's case, it's Zen, and said, why don't we do this so that you can run it on your own computer just like an ordinary operating system and have, have windows that are sitting on a screen that you can click on and drag around and interact with, like your web browser or your email client, but underneath the surface, they're running on different virtual machines that are isolated from each other and interact on a network. So you can turn an old laptop, if you happen to have one, into your own hypervisor and have your own little network playground to watch packets moving, if that interests you, or try different firewalls, configurations out, etc. This Pogo plug is it's not actually $7, it's like $30, I think. But you can easily get rid of the firmware that it comes with and install Arch Linux on it, and it makes this very nice little headless meaning not having a monitor attached. It makes this very nice headless little server that you can stick under your desk or wherever and pretend it's off in New Zealand. But in reality, if you screw up, you can reach under there, pull out the USB stick that you stuck in it, stick it in your computer, fix, put back. So as a learner's tool, it's very nice.
When you want a monitor, I don't quite understand the purpose of not having a, like you call it, a headless server. When you want to see what's going on in the server?
Oh, yes. You definitely want to see what's going on in the server.
How can you with that thing?
That was
I-
part of the secure shell that was mentioned earlier.
Yes.
You log in with a terminal window on your display locally, so you don't have to go over to the other machine, and you then have command on the other machine, just as though you were working on it locally. And it's encrypted across the network. You can look at all the log files and so on and so forth.
So how much different is SSH from, say, DNC?
DNC virtualizes an entire graphical desktop. SSH just virtualizes one terminal window. You get one terminal interaction, and that's it. But with Unix systems are designed so that you don't normally need graphical interaction with most of it. And so you can look in the log files, you can restart a service attached to your terminal, so you can see any output that might be there. And with many hosting environments, in a pinch, you can get the console, which is where some of the startup diagnostics would have gone, but you'll be getting that in a slightly different outcome.
So, yeah, thank you very much for that question. That was fascinating. Yes, you definitely do need a monitor. But usually when you're doing system administration, the monitor that you are looking at is the one that's connected to your computer. It's not connected to the server that's in New Zealand because you're not in New Zealand and you can't see that monitor even if it were connected. You use your monitor, your mouse, your keyboard, and SSH, or like he suggested, VNC sometimes, to go from your computer to that server and work on it. Okay, what to do with your playground. So the idea is that you're not a professional system administrator. You don't have any of these things that are depending on you. You just want to have fun with it. What can you do that is fun with this that gives you an opportunity to learn? And some stuff is you can run your own personal mail server. That doesn't sound like fun to me, but some people think it's really cool to be able to set it up and say, oh, this is my mail server. It's not Gmail. No, it's not Yahoo. You can run your own personal home page or website. For me, that just consists of having all of my favorite bookmarks show up in my web browser no matter which device I'm using. You can run a central file server for your home, like either as a backup thing or just so that, your kids take off with your laptop, you can still stream your MP3s on your phone. You can do stuff for others, which is great because not only does it give you a feeling of, altruism or whatever, it gives you that practice with legality and ethics and responsibility in a fairly small and risk-free environment, minimal risk environment, and you can do dev stuff. If your primary interest is in dev, then you can definitely expand your repertoire using sysadmin skills to give yourself more dev toys. And inevitably, this talk was too basic for some of you and a little over the heads of others, and I do apologize for that, but hopefully it was worthwhile.